Women's History Month is celebrated in March to highlight the contributions of women to events in history and contemporary society. I hope you enjoy and are inspired by the personal stories, shared experiences, determination, and sacrifices with family members, and now we're sharing those things with you. Thank you all again for coming. I'd like to bring Missy Crutchfield up, please, and she is our MC for today.
Hi, I'm Missy Crutchfield. My day job is the administrator of the Department of Education, Arts, and Culture. We also have the Chattanooga Southeast Tennessee Film Commission, and we had a real big announcement just happen a few minutes ago. So you guys are all going to be buzzing about Harrison Ford in no time. I'm proud to be here. I'm proud to be part of just anything I think that Deborah Levine does. Her work, her heart, her energy, and her collaborations are so much of what's great in Chattanooga and really all over the world because of the internet. So it's an honor for me to be here working again with Deborah, and an honor for me to be here experiencing firsthand these incredible stories that we're about to hear from these amazing women. Speaking of amazing women, I'm going to read you the list of some of the women in addition to Deborah Levine: Beate Zires, Janelle Reuter, Dr. Ramya Imbar Srinivasan, and of course Vincent Phipps. So you have a lot of wonderful things in store for you. Let me back up just a little bit and tell you about WOW. WOW Storytelling is Welcome Outstanding Women. It's an annual program created for Women's History Month by Deborah's Women's Council on Diversity, the Women's Council on Diversity. We would like to thank our host, of course, and Elizabeth Appling was up here, but we can't thank Erlanger enough, and I didn't know this beautiful Probasco Auditorium was even here, so Elizabeth and Erlanger, thank you so much for all you do, as well as the sponsor, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee. We can't do things without our sponsors, and we have two great ones here. The Storytelling Project combines personal stories with historical events and the universal inspiration of memorable women who are like social glue. So let me bring up Deborah Levine, who is the editor of the American Diversity Report, director of the Women's Council on Diversity, and co-founder of WOW Storytelling. She is an urban planner specializing in arts and culture. Go figure. She is an award-winning author whose stories encourage activism, altruism, and a global mindset. The story Deborah tells us today is based on the letters that her parents wrote each other during World War II and the Holocaust. Her father preserved them for 60 years, handing them down for her to share when the time was right. I believe the time is right. Thank you, Deborah Levine.
I have a soft voice. My voice is my mother's voice. All the women in the family sound like me, Bermuda girls. Soft, a little calypso, a lot of British. We were sea creatures, so we could hear the sound of the surf on the pink sand in our sleep. My mom was the original island girl, sweet-faced, gentle as the ocean breeze, and clueless as a stranded mermaid. And at 16, Estelle Doris Malloy left Bermuda for Radcliffe, the girls' college attached to Harvard. In 1937, you could not have the boys and the girls in the same classroom. So the faculty would teach at the women's college and walk 20 minutes down to Harvard and teach the same exact class to the Harvard men. But true love has a way, and when my mother was introduced to my father, who was a Harvard sophomore, the inevitable happened. Aaron Levine, my dad, he was like my mother, a Jewish, Eastern European immigrant family, but he was no Bermuda boy. He was driven, and he was goal-oriented. He was intense, sharp-edged, sharp-tongued, skinny as a rail, and as determined in courtship as he was elitist in intellect. My grandparents were a little worried about this because Estelle was so young, but the couple did marry just as World War II was getting underway. And my father ended up in boot camp in the hills, Southern Hills. He was a Yankee. Southern Hills, in a secret base designed to train counterintelligence officers and translators. So we alternated one day between cleaning bathrooms in all the classrooms and learning interrogation techniques a little bit and learning how to translate a little bit, doing field work with communications with telegrams and telegraphs and with radios and carrier pigeons. So my mother followed him because she loved him dearly and didn't complain about living in a rented old attic, sleeping sitting up in a rocking chair because she was allergic to the dust, and didn't see my dad except once every 8 days. She supported herself by being a substitute teacher for disabled children until Dad was shipped out overseas to the Europe and Germany theater. And then she was pregnant and alone, and so she went back to Bermuda and her parents and started writing. Aaron, darling, I am afraid. I am not a very big, brave girl. I miss you so much and love you so hard. I am sure you must feel that, even in Europe. It is a mere statement of fact that when I say I think of you constantly, it's every single minute of the 24 hours of every single day. Your letters, darling, are wonderful. I have them all arranged in chronological order, and I read them every day. And she wrote every day for 2 years, even while she was having their baby all by herself. Dearest honey boy, isn't it amazing? Here we are, parents. At this present befogged moment, I am still flat on my back and pretty weak. This is something we planned on together for so long, and now it has actually happened, and we are separated. I am thrilled, but it is impossible to describe how lonesome I am for you. Your son, sweetheart, is a cute little mite in a comical way. He is the tiniest, minutest atom of a thing I have ever seen. I showed him your picture. He didn't say Daddy, but he didn't cry either. So I took that as an encouraging sign. So my father would write back about the food and about the books he was reading and maybe a little bit about his hopes for his new little family. And in between, as much as military censorship would allow, he wrote about what he saw in the war. Shadowy references to opening concentration camps, to piles of bodies. And as the war came to a close, he added his thoughts to what would be called, eventually, the Holocaust. He wrote my mom, Dear Pie Face, the stories of German cruelty and oppression are not just stories, they are the real thing. And much of this was done by what we call ordinary people, not just the party members, but a vast number of common citizens. People who were jealous, depraved, and just plain terrified. A few seem to have the courage to laugh in Adolf's face. I have met some of these and have only tremendous admiration for them. Overwhelmed, Mom stopped writing. Instead, my grandmother wrote my father in what was a perfect example of island diplomacy. Aaron, dear, Estelle has been a little under the weather. I believe that she misses her errand boy and finally could not contain herself any longer. Perhaps all that pent-up feeling had to come out, and now she will feel all the better for it. Who knows what happened? We feel so helpless in helping her in any way, as down in our hearts we know that nothing really can help. Please, God, soon all will be reunited and happy once again. But just don't worry, Aaron, Estelle's fine now. I'm sure Dad had a fit until Mom resumed her cheerleading role. and wrote to what she called the swellest husband a girl could ever have, and reassured him that he would find a job after the war was over and it would be okay. They'd all be together. She continued that role for the next 40 years, weathering the death of one of her babies, raising a disabled child, becoming a principal of a school, and tutoring young cancer patients, even as she was dying of cancer herself. So how can I not be inspired by her never give up because I love you approach to life? So I never give up, and I love you too. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. That's wonderful. And let me remind everyone that although this is a storytelling evening, these stories are based on historical events. They are very real. Our next storyteller, and I've met our ladies and our gentlemen. Of course, we have one gentleman this evening, Vincent, but I've met them previously, and some of the accents are, well, I love accents anyway, but the next lady that we have coming up, she pronounced her name, and no matter how hard or how correct my American accent can say this, it can't touch the beauty and the exciting way that Beate Zires says her name. So Beate, please introduce yourself. I love this. But let me go ahead and give your bio here. She is a journalist from Bavaria, Germany, a beautiful part of the country. I did have the opportunity to visit Germany once a few years ago. She is here with her children and husband, who is an executive with Volkswagen Chattanooga. Beate serves as the communications coordinator for the Women's Council on Diversity and as a writer with the American Diversity Report. Her story shows the challenge of keeping a culture together across the divide of East and West Germany and the role that women played. Beate?
Thank you, Missy. My name is Beate Zires. And I want to tell you the story about West parcels. I want to take you back to the time when Germany was divided in the socialist East Germany and the capitalist West Germany. When Germany was defeated in World War II, it was divided like modern-day Korea still is. The intention of the Allies was to manage Germany together. So the Americans, the British and the French created a capitalistic democratic federation, while East Germany was put under USSR influence and became part of the Soviet bloc of communist countries. Berlin, the capital, was divided in 4 parts. The American, the British and the French sections of Berlin were isolated in the middle of the Soviet part of Germany. The Germans were hit hard by the separation, especially when the government of East Germany, the then called GDR, built walls and fences and protected their border with spring guns, dogs and an armada of soldiers. My parents lived in West German Bavaria. And this is where my mom's story comes in. The people in the West and the people in the East started to think about how they could stay in touch with each other. The only way to do so was writing letters. My mother became pen pals with a woman in East Germany she had never met and she would never meet. But they got to know each other very well. Most of what I know about life in the GDR in my younger years came from my mother's friend, and of course the experiences my mother had. People from West Germany were allowed to travel to East Germany, as long as they brought enough West German money or dollars. The government had established a mandatory exchange to get currency. It was a little bit difficult for West Germans to cross the border to East Germany, but it was an even more exciting experience to get back to the West. My mom was not a travel person, so she never visited her friend in East Germany. Instead, she sent parcels and more parcels. Since they had a lack of good coffee in Eastern Germany, the parcels always included coffee. My mom also packed chocolate, pantyhoses, sweaters, and good-smelling soap. Sometimes the coffee was gone when the parcel arrived at my mom's friend. The customs officer's wife probably ran out of coffee. We heard that the chocolate sometimes arrived looking like Swiss cheese, with tons of holes in it, because the customs people were searching for hidden money in it. One day, after decades of writing and reading letters from East Germany, our family traveled to the border. The town where my mom's friend lived was not even 100 miles from our home. I remember us walking over a field, and then the border appeared in front of us. We knew that all binoculars in the watchtowers were positioned on us. But we had brought our own binoculars and caught views to the other side of the Iron Curtain. To me, it seemed to be a window to the past. The whole world on the other side of the fence looked grey, and the few cars in front of the houses looked like from an old movie. The whole small town looked like scenes from the post-war period. There were no people on the streets and not in the yards. For me, it was a shock to see this completely different world so close to my home. On the other hand, the folks in East Germany thought they knew what the world looks like in the West. Just retired people were allowed to travel to Germany or to West Germany, to the US or wherever they wanted to go. Many East Germans found a way to watch West German TV, even though doing so was strictly forbidden. So after enjoying all the glamour of West German commercials, folks in East Germany knew exactly what to desire. My mom's friend, for example, told her one day she would like to have the most expensive coffee in town, Levi's jeans or Matchbox cars. My mom got a little bit mad about that, because she was a very economic thinking person. But she told herself, never mind, and continued on sending parcels. By the way, the East German woman passed away before Germany was united. But her daughter followed in her mother's footsteps and kept up to contact my mom. And my mom packed parcels until the Iron Curtain fell. A few days after that historic event, my mom heard a really unusual sound in front of her house. It was the sound of an East German car. The whole family of my mom's friend jumped out of the car, and they finally got to know each other in person. They stayed with my mom for 3 days, and then they went back to the East and probably started their new life in the then completely capitalistic Germany. Since then, 20 years have passed. My feeling is that people in the East and in the West still think a little bit different about basic principles, because this is a matter of education. Nevertheless, nowadays, we all got to know each other a lot better, and some of my best friends are originated in East Germany. But unlike my mother, I can meet with my friends whenever we want, and everybody can stay as long as we want. From my mother's generosity, I learned that it is my own freedom to put my principles aside sometimes and be a little bit generous. Thank you.
Thank you, Beate. And there is a bit of a theme around World War II and Germany, and of course this is about women and diversity and celebrating Women's History Month, but the next storyteller will also be sharing a story that involves World War II. Janelle Reuter is a student at Southern Adventist University, Southern Adventist University, and yes, I know how to pronounce it because my communications director, Melissa Turner, is a graduate there. It's a wonderful school, and we've had some interns work with us from there. We're very proud to have a partnership with them. Janelle is a student at Southern Adventist University where she is working toward her master's degree in social work. Having a desire to learn about diversity and a passion for experiencing different cultures that led her to move to New Zealand, where she earned her bachelor's degree in geography. This passion was ignited by her mother's stories of growing up during World War II in Italy and the changes that she experienced relocating to the United States, which she will share with us today. Thank you. Janelle Reuter?
We're all about the age where our mothers came from World War II. I want you all for a minute to imagine driving down a country road in Italy. Now blink. You know that town you just passed when you blinked? That was very similar to my mother's hometown. And that's where my story begins. My mother, Liliana Iannucci, was born in 1926 in a small apartment in Caserta, a little town just outside of Naples. Her mother died 4 days after she was born, and her dad, Antonio, placed her in a convent with nuns, picking her up 4 years later with his new wife and their young daughter. Mom was just 14 years old when the war began in 1939. Italy, under Mussolini, sided with Germany for the first 4 years, and then it became an American ally. Now, Mom watched as her little apartment house and the town quickly turned into rubble under the American bombs. As she and her best friend Anna went running for cover one day, Anna didn't make it. With her dad Antonio soldiering in Africa and her stepmother crushing under pressure, Mom had much of the responsibility for her 4 younger siblings. Mom didn't like going into the bomb shelters because they were dark, had bugs, and many people in there were sick with disease. So she took her family to live in the caves in the mountains instead. One time she came off the mountain and went back to what was left of her home and foraged for whatever foodstuff she could find. She was making a soup of some beans, pasta, rice, and a couple of old onions when 2 German soldiers put a machine gun to her ribs and ate what she had just finished cooking. They handed her 2 walnuts as a thank you for the food, but she knew of this trick. The Nazis would often put gunpowder in empty walnut shells, so when people would bite down to crack them open, their heads would get blown off. So as the soldiers walked away out of her sight, she threw one of the walnuts as far as she could, and it exploded when it hit the ground. She could hear the soldiers laugh as they drove away. As the war subsided, Mom and her stepmother recovered money and valuables that they had hidden away behind bricks that they replaced in the wall, and together they opened a little produce store in front of their rebuilt apartment. With Mom as the manager, the store ran wonderfully. It was a success. Mom would often take the money from the till and treat her siblings to movies and candy, until Harold Vandenberg, an American soldier from Wisconsin, showed up. He and his army troop were stationed in Caserta, defending Italy and rebuilding the new American ally. When Dad would visit with Mom's family during his free time, he would count all the money and balance all the books, thinking he was doing a great thing. But he actually made it much more difficult for my mom to carry on as she always had. When Granddad Antonio returned from the war in Africa, he loved my dad. But my mom was very happy when Dad's assignment ended and he got sent back to America. Dad kept in touch with my granddad, and 2 years after returning to America, Dad sent a letter to Antonio asking for Mom's hand in marriage. When I asked my dad what was it about Mom that kept her on his mind, he said he loved her. But as an adult, I now see that she was strong, resourceful, a nurturer, and beautiful. When Dad's letter arrived, Mom wasn't interested and said no. But Grandma and Granddad said, Liliana, you go to America. You'll have a good life there. So Mom left everything she knew and loved behind to start a new life with a man she didn't really like. Arriving in Wisconsin in the middle of winter was the coldest temperature she'd ever felt. She was no longer in sunny Italy, and that was just the beginning of the changes in her life. My parents lived with my dad's family, his parents and 2 younger siblings. Everyone in the household either went to school or worked, so Mom was alone every day to do the cooking and cleaning. She spoke no English, had no friends to talk with, there was no internet, and the phone service was limited, so she could only write letters to keep in touch with the family she left behind. When she went outside and airplanes flew overhead, she would run and hide for cover in the basement. War, planes, and bombs was all she knew. One day my dad took her to see where his father worked. His dad was an undertaker, a mortician. She saw the corpses he'd prepared for burial and assumed he was a murderer. In Italy, Mom had been the caretaker of her family, but when she came here, she was suddenly dependent on others. This was a difficult blow for her self-esteem. But Mom was determined, and as she became more familiar with the culture, she taught herself to speak and read English. She prevailed over many hardships that come from living in a different culture, and even went on to gain a new identity as a mom, and she was very good at it. My mom was my model for strength and character and adaptability. She embraced her individuality as the only dark-skinned woman with an accent living in an all-white suburban neighborhood. When the school gave me a hard time for being absent and sent me home to get a more appropriate note, Mom sent one back written in Italian. There were never any questions after that. Mom was not one for holding back. My mom was the only Catholic in our family and attended the Catholic Church. One time during confession, which is supposed to be anonymous, she said, "Father, since you know who I am because of my accent, how about you confess your sins to me this time?" As a child, I attended Lutheran Sunday school in accordance with my dad's wishes, but since he rarely attended church, I would attend Catholic church with my mom. While she kept true to her faith, I learned acceptance of all religions. I lost my mom by the time I was 30 years old, and I have appreciated her even more since then. As I grew up, I didn't really realize the lessons that I had learned through her hardships. As children, my siblings and I were raised on my mom's war stories. And I have shared those stories with my own children. The lessons and strengths that were inherently my mom's life were handed to me woven throughout my time with her. As I age, I see signs of her strength in me. Because of my upbringing, I have chosen a career path in social work, which allows me to embrace all people and choose to stand for fairness, combating unequal provision for health care, education, and opportunities for all people alike. It was my mom's wisdom that gave insight to me.
That was wonderful, Janelle. Congratulations on your choice of a master's degree in social work. I was so moved when I was introducing you, Janelle, and I looked out and I saw your daughter, who's wiping tears right now, and I was so moved by the way that she spoke of you and said, "Can't you tell? I'm her daughter. I look just like her." Congratulations on being, I think, one of the most important things that we as women can be, and that's a mom, being an amazing mother like you had. Thank you. Our next storyteller and our last woman storyteller, I told Vincent he's going to wrap up the evening storyteller. I said, "Do you want me to make you an honorary woman?" He goes, "You can make me whatever you want." I said, "I won't do that." But last year, I had the honor to travel to India on a Mahatma Gandhi legacy tour with his grandfather, retracing his grandfather's footsteps. It was all about social justice and the things that I learned about people and diversity and women and empowerment and the strength of women, because some of the women in India are the strongest women that you'll ever see. I've yet to go to Africa, and that's next, and I've heard that you'll find similar things there. The spirit and strength of women from being mothers, the way we're wired. And as I introduced myself earlier, and I said my day job is the administrator of the Department of Education, Arts, and Culture, because as women we have so many hats, so many layers. We're mothers, we're sisters, we're best friends, we have hobbies, we have, just anything. We're there to do it, probably sometimes too much and to the detriment of our health, but we are amazing, and as Maya Angelou will say, phenomenal. So I'm so honored to be up here in this amazing cast of storytellers with their historical stories of family and periods of history that we must not forget. And just to be able to introduce them and share a little bit about my life and tell you how honored I am to be here. Our next speaker is from India, Dr. Ramya Imber Srinivasan. Now, Ramya told me, she said, "May I change my introduction?" And I said, "Sure, just tell me." And she said, "Well, it's so formal and I don't want to make it sound like, I'm bragging or anything." I said, "This is your work, this is you." I said, "So I will reflect your humility." She really didn't want me to read this, but she has worked so hard and absolutely, as another phenomenal woman, deserves this introduction. Dr. Srinivasan studied medicine in one of the top 5 Indian medical schools. As a medical student, she volunteered in organizations for the uplifting of destitute women, helping them get vocational, educational, and financial assistance to start small businesses. Passionate about medicine, Ramya was a transitional year resident at the University of Tennessee College of Medicine in Chattanooga and is now an internal medicine resident. She will share how her grandmother diffused religious conflict in her small village in southern India and inspired Ramya to become a doctor.
All right. Thank you for introduction. And I want to start off by saying that I don't want to offend anybody. I'm just going to be presenting facts. And I'm sorry if I would end up offending anybody here. So this is a story about my grandmother. She's fondly called Patti. And she is going to turn 90 this April. Yeah. And well, going back, this is a story pretty much in a pre-independence era in India. It was a time when India had both Hindus and Muslims who were pretty much very secular back then, but India is very secular even now. But this was in 1937 where riots broke out between the Hindus and Muslims for reasons because when India was being ruled by British, they had a divide and rule strategy which they had started, which segregated the Hindus and the Muslims based on territory and made Muslims pay higher taxes compared to the Hindus. And the Muslims, being a minority in general, had felt discriminated because they had to pay higher taxes. And the divide and rule strategy just added fuel to the fire and worsened. A little harder.
Taping this, yes.
Okay, gotcha. All right. So the divide and rule strategy made it even worse, if you guys can hear me now. And this led to devastating riots all around India. And this also spread down south, where my grandmother is from. She's from a very small village in southern India called Malur. And she was 15 years old at the time when the riots happened there. And for the most part, the Hindus and the Muslims had gotten along very well with each other in our village. To give you a bit of a background about the communities, my grandmother grew up in a house which was very luxurious, and she had at least 6 cars in her house. Her father was a high priest of the Hindu temple, and he was also the advisor to the king of the region. He was called Embar, and that's my last name, a part of my last name. And he also was a school teacher. He was a headmaster of a high school, which was the only high school for over a 60-mile radius. And he used to teach both Hindus and Muslims, never discriminated between any of them, and he taught pretty much the same principles that everybody needed to follow as human beings. He taught math and science, and sometimes liked to teach arts also. He taught Sanskrit, and most of his students were Muslims who learned Sanskrit from him. If you think of Sanskrit, it seems to be a language mainly of the Hindus and the Hindu scriptures. But it was amazing to see many of the Muslims coming to him to learn Sanskrit. And so when the riots were breaking out in different parts of the country, it actually also spread to his village. The Hindus and the Muslims, as I told you already, had been getting along with each other, but just a small incident sparked a devastating riot when a group of Hindu boys eve-teased a Muslim girl who was walking by. And that led to riots, basically the bystanders who were Muslims beat up the Hindu boys, ended up killing 3 of them. And because there were tensions already throughout the country between the Hindus and the Muslims, it landed up having a bigger riot, killing at least 1,000 people within 2 days in our village. I wanted to let you know that the population of our village was probably 3,000. So at least 1/3 of the people died. And a lot of shops were burned down, children died. Many of the women were killed also. And on the second day, the riots lasted for 2 days. And you can imagine how bad it was that 1,000 people were killed within 2 days. And on the second day, where Embar was the headmaster in the high school, a gang of Muslim boys entered the high school trying to ransack the school and also abduct the abduct the Hindu girls. And Pati was one of his students in the school, and he was in the middle of a class when he noticed that gang of boys were coming into the high school, and he immediately went outside, locked the door, and guarded the door. As the gang members approached, he pleaded them for peace. But they were too enraged to listen, so one of the gang members had a sword. He took it out and he beheaded my great-grandfather. And Patti was inside the room, and she was witness to the whole incident. And the gang members, once they realized what they had done, they fled, and the police arrived shortly after. But Patti tells me that in the few hours that she was in the classroom, they never let them out of the classroom because the riots were still going on. She remembered all the teachings that her father had taught her every day. The teachings were the Vedantas. Vedantas are the holy Hindu teachings. They're the 5 basic teachings that every human being should follow in his life. It is Satya, which means the truth, Shanti, which is peace, Dharma, righteousness, Prema, love, and Ahimsa, non-violence. She says that in the few hours, she realized that her father would have wanted her to put these principles to practice. And after they were let out of the high school, when the riots were somewhat calmer than they were before, she went back home, and when her entire family were still in shock, on the same day, within a few hours, she went to the governor and donated a sum of $30,000 US. Deborah converted that for me. And $30,000 US in 1937 was a huge amount that she donated to the governor, and requested him that he use this money for a medical treatment of both Hindus and Muslims. Regardless of their religion, they be treated equal. And the governor was really moved by this, and also one of the victims was the Muslim leader's daughter, who was severely injured, and she needed to be transported to another government hospital for a higher level of care. And being a small village, the hospital was probably 80 miles away, and she gave them her car so that could be used as an ambulance to be transported. And realizing what she had done, the Muslim leader deeply apologized to her because some of the Muslim gang members had pretty much killed her father. But my grandmother, being as magnanimous as she is, she said, it's okay, we'll let that go. We'll put the past behind. And the governor pretty much announced the same evening on All India Radio, which is a national broadcasting network. It was broadcasted throughout the state, where my grandmother had to talk about what she had done. She was very shy, just like me, did not want to talk a lot. But then she gathered the courage. I'll just quote what she said. So, she said, "Embodiments of love. I may be only 15 years old, but I have a request. I remember not too long ago that the Hindus and Muslims used to play together, go to the same school, buy clothes from the same store, and fetch water from the same well. I cannot believe we have lost all self-respect and morals. My father is no more, but I remember his teachings, and I know most of you were his students, and remember that you all follow the 5 fundamental principles that my father had taught you. Satya, Dharma, Shanti, Prema, and Ahimsa. The Satya, the truth, is that we are all a part of the same country. Righteousness, Dharma, lies in supporting a fellow human being. Prema, love, blossoms with a smile rather than a sword. Peace lies in forgiving each other's mistakes. And Ahimsa, non-violence, is an innate quality as an Indian. The worst thing you can do to a child is to take their parents away from them. Many children have become orphan, and I want to put an end to these riots. my brothers and sisters belonging to India, I pray that you will support my cause and join hands in creating a better tomorrow for children like us. Patti went on to become the first lady graduate of the Mysore University, which is the biggest southern university, in 1937. She studied masters in arts. In 1967, a hospital was built in her name in the village. She always wished that her granddaughter would grow up to be a doctor, and I believe that I'm living that dream today. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Dr. Srinivasan. Being Women's History Month, one of my favorite sayings, and I actually have a little bumper sticker kind of in my office. It says, "Well-behaved women rarely make history," and I love that because it reminds us how far we've come and how tough it is sometimes, but how we must stand our ground and move forward no matter what. Because although we may be well presented, as in the case of these ladies, and well articulated and well, all of those wonderful well things, when it comes to our motives, when it comes to our intentions, when it comes to our values, we will not compromise. We will move forward, and we will behave as necessary to achieve our goals. And here, with diversity and social justice and sharing stories that we must remember, one of the consistent things with movements and wars and issues from the Holocaust to the Trail of Tears and on, is we must remember, never forget slavery. Because if we forget and we stop sharing these stories, then we risk it happening again. So again, I am honored to be here to meet and hear these lovely stories, and I can't wait to see them with the videotape on the American Diversity Report and social media, because we're all using social media now, and these are so powerful. Ladies, you are a gift to this community and to the world. With that said, I have to say, Vincent Ivan Phipps, you must be incredible, and I know you are, because you are here as the only gentleman presenting with women's storytellers during Women's History Month. So I am so looking forward to hearing what you're going to say. And Vincent is a friend, and I've known him for a while. But Vincent Ivan Phipps is an award-winning storyteller, international speaker, and co-creator of WOW Storytelling along with Deborah Levine. Vincent's stories are dipped in out-loud laughter, dashed with contagious energy, I'm hearing it already, and marinated in Southern charm for over 30 years for a deep-fried funny. I think I'm getting hungry. Vincent is a professor of public speaking at University of Tennessee at Chattanooga and a mentor of African-American youth as coordinator of the AXO contest of NAACP Chattanooga. Vincent is a professional motivational speaker. He is also president of his own training company, Communication VIP, very important people skills. Vincent Ivan Phipps.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Here's what I'd like for you to do. First, I want you to free your hands up. Just free your hands up. All right, now here's what I want you to do. I want you to reach as high as you can to the ceiling, as high as you possibly can. Reach. Now hold it. Now, reach a little bit further. All right, stop. And put your hands down. Now, the first time I said to reach as high as you could, I then said stop. Then I said reach a little bit further, and every one of you reach a little bit further. How is that possible? If I say reach as high as you could the first time, how is that possible? And here's how that's possible. Because the message my mother always taught me is you give it your best the very first shot. Always. Now I wonder what type of woman can have this level of conviction that she always wanted to strive for excellence all of the time. Now this story is about how my mother helped to desegregate downtown Chattanooga, as she was a member of the 1960 sit-in led by the Howard High School students right here in Chattanooga, Tennessee in the year 1960. Now those who know my mother, she is the most gregarious, friendly, brownie baking woman you've ever seen. So I never saw my mother as a militant or as volatile or someone who would fight for racial equality. But my mother said there is also a great strength in being peaceful and getting things done. And I could never understand that about my mother, how she could be so outright friendly but still be a tiger or a tigress, ladies. when needed. The first time I saw evidence of the ferocity of my mother, Doris Phipps, we were going through Corinth, Mississippi. We got lost. My mother said, let's get a bite to eat before we get back on the road. Now, this was the early 80s. We go into a tiny, tiny diner. And I spoke to my mom about 2 hours ago, and I got her permission to tell this. And I said, Mom, is it okay if I tell about the time we went to that diner? Boy, don't tell that story. But if you tell it right. So I got permission. We go into a diner, and as soon as we walk in, it was evident that people in that diner in that small town in Mississippi had yet to see people like my mom and I. But we didn't care. We were hungry. We wanted to eat. Now, we stood there and waited patiently for about 20 minutes. Now, the place had probably about 15 tables. Only about 5 of them had people in it. So we weren't in a busy time. So I said, Mama, why don't we just go? Let's get out of here. She said, no, we have the right to be here like everybody else. I said, all right, Mama, no problem. The waitress never comes over to us, walking past us, never saying hello, taking people that came in after us, sitting them down. I got frustrated. I didn't have the patience of my mother. I was going to say something. I said, Mama, she grabbed my hand. She says, we will wait, be obedient, and we'll wait to be seated like everybody else. Well, the waitress finally acknowledged us, handed us 2 menus, then walked off. Mom grabbed my hand, took us to the table. We sat down. We waited another 20 minutes. This lady finally comes over, comes to our table, and to me, it was one of the funniest moments of my life. My mom thinks it's funny now, but back then, she didn't think it was funny. The lady came over to our table, and she says, what y'all want? And my mother said, thank you for taking our order. We would like to order. And then the waitress cuts off my mom mid-sentence. And the waitress says, chicken. And I'm sitting, oh my gosh. There's my mom, calm. There's the lady. You want fried chicken, don't you? And my mom rises up slowly, looks at that waitress. And my mother says, it is unfortunate that in this day and age, you can still stereotype people in such a derogatory manner. I feel sorry for you, and I hope that you improve and you see people for who and what they are. Walks toward the door. I'm still there, Deborah. I'm looking at my mom. And then the waitress looks at me and says, you got something to say too? And I said, yes, ma'am. That was amazing. She said, what was so amazing about it? And I said to her, how did you know I wanted fried chicken? My mom didn't think it was funny back then, but now we laugh about it. I wonder, where does that conviction come from? Where does that fire derive? And I found out that my mother, in the year 1960, she did something that changed not only Chattanooga, but it changed our country. And I'm going to pass around something, because you're not going to believe this. I'm going to pass around some flyers or some sheets that I found from a magazine. This is from an actual magazine. They even did a movie about what my mother was involved in called No Incident, No Service. That's my mother. Now, when you pass this picture around, you'll see a group of high school students, all in trench coats, overcoats, and you'll see an angelic, majestic-like woman who is at a counter in Chattanooga in a diner in a fur coat. My mother said, you can change history and be stylish at the same time. Here, here. I found out that our councilman, Lehman Pierce, and Booker T. Scruggs, and my mother were all students in Howard High School. And they led a petition to sit in at the downtown Woolworths and other downtown establishments. Now, in the year 1960, they were segregated preventing any African Americans to sit at the tables. Now, you could go to the back through the alleys and order your meal, and they would hand it to you. Or you could wait outside, and they would bring it to you. Or there was a small section that had about 2 tables in a corner that had a sign on it that said colored only. You could sit there, but you were not allowed to sit at those tables. Now, what made this event unique is that the students of Howard High School were the first all high school-led petition in all of the 1960 sit-ins, right here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Now, other adults had led petitions throughout the South. There were even some college students, as far as the Virginias and the schools up in D.C. that led petitions, but none of them were all led by high school students. Now, during that time, they would hurt you and put your hands on you, and it was okay by law. They had rules that they had to follow. And part of those rules were they wanted to make sure that all of the high school students were obedient. And I asked my mom, I said, weren't you afraid, or weren't you concerned about being attacked? And she said, well, we were more afraid of our parents who told us not to go. They had to, one, they couldn't use profanity. They had to be respectful. So if someone put their hands on you, tried to pull you back, you couldn't say anything back to them. Number 2, they said, everybody take money with you. Because in the event you sit at that counter and they ask you to order something, you got to have money to pay for it. And they said, also, you have to make sure that whatever you do, no violence. Now, I think about the atrocities of the racial tension at that time. And I'm thinking about, right now, in 2012, some of us, when we are in traffic, if someone cuts us off, look at you, I see you. In the event you go to a establishment or a restaurant or a movie theater and you see the perfect parking space, you try to get it and someone gets in front of you, you want to tell them they're number 1, don't you, Earl? That's right. And you don't want to tell them with this finger. It's the other finger you tell them you're number 1 with. So I think, what kind of control could she have had back then? Now, how many of you remember a lot of the old 1960s footage where they show the fire hoses being used on African Americans? Now, a lot of people think that the civil rights movement was only African Americans. It was a lot of Caucasians that were involved that also felt those injustices were wrong. Well, it was our mayor, Giotti, who was the first to call the Chattanooga Police Department and the Chattanooga Fire Department to turn those fire hoses on those young people. And when you see that going on in Selma, Alabama, you saw that going on in Mississippi, you saw that going on out in the Carolinas, it was Chattanooga where fire hoses were first used as retractors to prevent riots. Now, my mother said that it was baffling to see people being washed down the street. And there was nothing really to grab hold to. She said that those fire hoses could take the bark off of a tree. So to see women and men being literally flushed because they just wanted to sit at the counter, they felt that this was wrong, so they wanted to do something about it. So Lehman Pierce, my mom, Booker T. Scruggs, and a group of other Howard students, they decided to do a sit-in, all peaceful. They said, all we need is for one person to serve us. That's all we need. Now, it took them a lot of control to maintain their composure. I know I would not have had the composure. I know now I would get upset if 10 years ago my pizza came late. So I know that I would not have had that level of control. But I'm so grateful that women like my mother, and there weren't a whole lot of women on the front line then because it was dangerous. So to have my mother, the strongest woman that I know, be on that front line, at that counter. You look at that picture, you don't see any other men in that picture. You see a young man, a young man, a young man, and my mama, the diva. I ask to this day, where did you get that level of courage, mama? How did you have that level of stamina? Where did you have that conviction to know you were doing the right thing? Even back then. And she said, I wasn't trying to make history. I was just trying to change that day. She said, I wasn't trying to change the world. I was just trying to change the minds of those people. She said, if you want to change the world, she said, baby, go do it. But work on one person at a time. And it was because now, when I go to the Majestic Theater downtown to watch an overpriced movie in 3D, y'all know what I'm talking about. Whenever I go to eat at Mellow Mushroom or I walk past the Chamber of Commerce, I think that 62 years ago, which really isn't that long ago, I would not have been allowed to speak. I would have had to give up my seat. If I was hungry, I wanted to go to Shapiro's or to the Yellow Deli or to Sticky Fingers, I could not go. I would have to go around the back and order my meal like a dog and have it served me through a window because of the way that I looked. And whenever I walk downtown, I get prideful because I know that was my mother and a group of several others that made sure that we could all have the right to eat where we wanted to. And I want to close with this, and these are words I always share. My mother taught me that no matter what you do, there are two types of people in this world. My mother told me no matter who you are, no matter what you do, you're going to be one of these two types of people. My mother said it's up to you to determine which type you're going to be. My mother said the first type of person can have the type of personality that can brighten up a room just by walking in. Then she said there was a second type of person, and they can brighten up a room just by walking out. Thank you.
Thank you, Vince. That was wonderful, and what an amazing way to honor Doris, your mother, who is a friend of my father's, who during that same time period was a statesman and was serving in the Tennessee General Assembly in the House of Representatives. And in the 50s, right before 60, he received death threats for bringing the first African American onto the Tennessee General Assembly, the floor there. Seems absolutely crazy now, but got death threats from that. That gentleman was C.B. Robinson, who later became a state representative. So I'm very proud of him and his work. And to that point, Howard, my department, Education, Arts, and Culture, the Chattanooga department, we are now working with Howard students on something we're called Howard Takes a Stand, which is a nod to those same sit-ins back in 1960. And we'll be meeting with them on Mondays coming up in the next couple of weeks, trying to get their signs, their protests, their activism started, because we believe they can do it once again from the school, high school students telling a community, no more violence, no more gangbangers, no more bullying, good stuff. So I would love to invite you to come and speak to those students, Vincent. Right now, it's the closing of our evening, and I want to thank, my goodness, all of our wonderful women and our gentlemen storytellers, from Deborah Levine to Beate Zires to Janelle Reuter, Dr. Ramya Imbar Srinivasan, and of course, Vincent Ivan Phipps. This evening wouldn't have happened without Erlanger Medical System or Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee. Have to include the American Diversity Report and, of course, the Women's Council on Diversity. And Deborah Levine, thank you so much again. I'm Missy Crutchfield with Education, Arts, and Culture, and sisterhood with you all as a mother, a sister, a friend, and a fighter for equity and social justice in Chattanooga and in the world, as we all are, starting with my life and one person, one day at a time. I think there's refreshments outside. God bless you all, and let's keep up the good work.